It is 1932, and America is suffering from a cruel and deeply personal schism. On one side of the thin wall separating Fifth Avenue from the rest of the city, life continues in a shimmering, insulated bubble of extravagance. Imagine the scene at one of New York's grandest hotels, crystal glasses clinking, champagne flowing, and tables layered with elaborate feasts that defied the decade's pervasive fear. The cutlery gleamed, a symbol of untouched wealth and privilege. For those inside, the depression was merely a regrettable headline, not a grim reality. The weight of the silver fork was simply the comfortable burden of being rich. Caught directly between these two contradictory worlds was Thomas Lowell, a man whose hands dictated the culinary standards of the elite. He was a master craftsman, a celebrated five-star chef whose precise, expensive creations brought joy to the oblivious and kept him comfortably housed and paid while millions lost everything. He embodied the pinnacle of professional success, but every single night this success became a moral condemnation. His soul was tortured by a single, inescapable truth that played out hour after hour in the hotel's opulent dining rooms. The food that was being tragically and carelessly discarded could be the lifeline for the thousands dying slowly of hunger just outside his kitchen doors. The waste was a moral obscenity, a literal mountain of sustenance that piled up in the refuse bins. Untouched plates of prime rib, forgotten mounds of delicate caviar, whole loaves of fresh bread, all deemed unfit for reuse, all heading straight to the dump. Strict hotel policy, driven by fear of liability and a dedication to maintaining the facade of high luxury, forbade the distribution of these scraps. But to Lowell, this wasn't garbage, it was salvation. It was a physical testament to the grotesque inefficiency and callous indifference of a broken system. The image of those rotting truffles and untouched steaks haunted his dreams, a silent, sickening counterpoint to the hollow eyes he saw begging on the street. The price of his silence was the slow, spiritual erosion of his own humanity. The price of action? Everything he had built. Lowell realized that small, discreet acts of charity were useless against a problem of this magnitude. He needed a pipeline, a radical underground operation that would systematically redirect this luxury waste away from the incinerator and toward the starving. He was fully aware of the stakes. He could lose his career, his reputation, and his freedom if his plan was discovered. He faced the very real prospect of trading his white chef coat and his prestigious salary for a prison uniform and public humiliation. But tonight, the moral conflict reached its breaking point, and the choice was finally made. Thomas Lowell decided to wager everything he owned against his own conscience. He was about to trade his gleaming, sterile kitchen for a filthy, freezing basement, and his prestigious position for a secret partnership with a low-level night watchman. He was about to commit an act of institutional theft, driven entirely by compassion. This is the moment the chef exchanged the silver fork of luxury for the humble wooden spoon of true service. A story of how one man defied an entire system to prove that the most essential ingredient in America was always its unbreakable human spirit. The year 1932 was the absolute nadir of the Great Depression. This economic disaster was not merely marked by numbers on a stock ticker, it was a crisis of survival and, crucially, a brutal crisis of dignity. Nearly 1/4 of the American workforce was trapped in the paralyzing shame of unemployment. The homeless shantytowns known as Hoovervilles dotted the landscapes of major cities, silent monuments to the shattered promise of American prosperity. For the proud American man and woman asking for help, standing in those agonizingly slow bread lines was often worse than the gnawing hunger itself. Yet this profound suffering occurred right next door to incredible, untouchable wealth. The opulent hotels and high society clubs of Manhattan continued to function as normal, fueled by the fortunes that somehow the crash had only marginally touched. This disconnect, the glittering feast mere feet away from utter starvation, was the single most painful symbol of the era. It was a societal wound that refused to heal, a visible injustice that challenged the very notion of community and shared struggle. This is the backdrop against which our hero, Thomas Lowell, moved. He was a professional, an artist whose medium was flavor and whose audience was the elite. But his true importance in this history lies not in his 5-star rating, but in his unique access to this moral fault line. Lowell realized that while he couldn't fix the stock market or stop the bank closures, he could wage a personal war against the central injustice, waste in the face of want. His plan was revolutionary and entirely reliant on secrecy. He wasn't aiming to simply run a basic charity soup kitchen. He aimed to dismantle the very symbolism of the disparity. By using the finest discarded ingredients of the wealthy, he would not only provide essential nutrition, but also restore a vital sense of worth to the recipients. He was determined to ensure that every bowl served was not just a meal, but an act of defiance, a taste of the dignity that the Depression had cruelly stolen from them. This is how Chef Thomas Lowell went underground, setting the stage for one of the most audacious acts of kindness in American history. Thomas Lowell's typical day began in a symphony of opulence and precision. The clatter of his pristine kitchen was a machine dedicated to excess. He oversaw the preparation of elaborate 7-course meals for parties where a single dinner cost more than a working man's yearly wage. He was a culinary deity, adored by his staff and revered by the management. Yet, behind the flawless plating and the celebratory atmosphere, Lowell saw the rot. He witnessed the casual indifference with which hundreds of pounds of high-quality ingredients were designated as waste. A banquet tray, barely touched, was condemned because, officially, it had left the kitchen. A half-full terrine of pâté was discarded because the menu had rotated. Every throwaway dish felt like a personal insult to his craft and a moral affront to his soul. The contrast became a physical burden. Lowell would often catch glimpses of the city's grim reality when he slipped out for a late-night break. Just outside the hotel's protected walls, the air was thick with desperation. He saw the proud men, former clerks and factory managers, lining up in silence, their eyes hollowed out by months of deprivation. They knew what riches lay just inside the thick marble walls. They could smell the roasting duck and the truffle oil. The shame of being a successful, well-fed man haunted Lowell, making the very taste of his own glorious food bitter. He tried to rationalize, "It's the system, it's policy. I am just a chef." But the inner voice was deafening. He realized he could not simply provide food. He had to redeem the waste itself. He had to reclaim those ingredients for the community they were meant to serve. The plan was crystallizing. He would establish a secure pipeline to divert this luxury from the garbage chute to a secret kitchen. The risk was astronomical. Stealing food from the hotel, even food destined for the trash, was a fireable offense and grounds for criminal prosecution. If he was caught, the hotel would make an example of him to prevent wider labor unrest. He needed an accomplice, someone who had seen enough of the world's unfairness to risk everything for an abstract moral good. He found that man in Mr. O'Malley, the hotel's longtime silent night watchman. O'Malley was a man of few words, his face etched with the hardships of a life that had recently included the death of his grandchild due to illness and poverty. He had no love for the elite who slept soundly under his guard. Lowell approached O'Malley with no preamble, laying out the sheer scale of the waste and his revolutionary, terrifying plan to hijack the hotel's refuse system. He wasn't asking O'Malley to steal money, he was asking him to steal dignity. O'Malley didn't look at the chef, he looked at the cold, dark alley. After a long moment, he simply nodded, his eyes hard with resolve. "My grandbaby deserved better than a pauper's grave, chef," he muttered. The deal was struck in silence. O'Malley would use his master key and his knowledge of the service tunnels to create a 45-minute window every midnight. The perfect waste, the pristine, unused excess from banquets and dinner services, would be diverted to a secret pickup point. The chef and the night watchman, the guardians of the rich, had now become the silent suppliers of the poor. The first night of the operation arrived, tense and freezing cold. The truck was loaded, the bins disguised. Lowell was racing against the clock and the risk of detection with every turn. But as he pulled away, he saw a shadow move. A car without lights had been parked 2 blocks down. It pulled out, moving slowly, deliberately following him into the dark streets. Lowell gripped the steering wheel, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't the police. It was someone else. Someone who knew his face. Their secret, which was meant to save 1,000 lives, was already compromised. The pursuit was brief but terrifying. The shadowed car followed Lowell only far enough to confirm the destination, an abandoned textile warehouse basement he had quietly leased, using every cent of his savings. The figure in the car remained a mystery, but the message was clear. Someone was watching. Lowell realized his operation had to become invisible, relying entirely on the cloak of darkness and the silence of the desperate. The warehouse itself was a desolate concrete tomb, but it was far from the hotel's eyes and large enough to become the sanctuary he needed. This was to be the birthplace of the Bekdim, the wooden spoon. Lowell immediately poured his focus into transforming the space. He installed massive industrial cauldrons powered by rudimentary coal stoves. He didn't just need a kitchen, he needed a fortified bunker of hope. The daily transfers continued, a high-stakes, choreographed dance between him and O'Malley. Every midnight, thousands of dollars worth of high-quality food, unopened jars of caviar, untouched prime cuts of meat, and loaves of artisan bread were moved from the domain of the elite to the domain of the forgotten. Lowell, wearing grimy overalls instead of his crisp chef whites, learned to navigate the back alleys, dodging police patrols and the predatory eyes of the local gangs. But when he finally had the food, the final crushing obstacle appeared. Pride. Lowell's first attempts to serve the soup of shame were met with deep suspicion. The poor had heard the whispers. The chef was feeding them rich man's slop. Many would rather face true starvation than accept what they perceived as the physical manifestation of their humiliation. The very people he was trying to save were rejecting his radical act of charity. "I am poor, but I am not garbage," one elderly woman declared, turning away from the offered bowl. Lowell recognized the profound psychological injury of the depression. Food was worthless if it lacked dignity. He changed his approach. He stopped simply serving and started preaching. He told them this wasn't charity, this was reclamation. He used his culinary genius to turn the scraps into something transcendent. He made complex French sauces and savory broths from the discarded bones. The soup didn't taste like leftovers, it tasted like high cuisine. He served every person, looking them in the eye, and told them, "This is the finest food in New York. You deserve it. Take it as your due." Slowly, the flavor convinced them. The line grew long, silent, and deeply loyal. The kitchen was now a beacon, but beacons attract unwanted attention. One frigid night, as the last of the soup was being served, the heavy metal door to the basement was violently ripped open. It wasn't the police. Standing silhouetted in the single street lamp was Mr. Donovan, the head of security for the Grand Hotel. His face was a mask of cold fury. He was flanked by two large men who looked ready for violence. "Chef Lowell," Donovan's voice cut through the steam. "The manager wants to know where his $200 worth of missing lamb went. And I think I just found the answer." The secret was out. The life-saving operation was about to be shut down by the very institution that supplied its heart. The confrontation was swift and deadly silent. Donovan didn't raise his voice. His power was the threat of ruin. He presented Lowell with the stark choice: surrender the operation immediately and face only termination, or resist and face public scandal, arrest, and criminal charges. The fate of the entire neighborhood, which had come to rely on the warmth and dignity of Lowell's kitchen, hung on his reply. Lowell did not flinch. He walked over to the largest cauldron, dipped the wooden spoon, and offered the bowl to Donovan. "Taste it," Lowell challenged. "Taste the consequences of your waste." Donovan refused the soup, but he was trapped. He knew a public investigation would reveal his employer's grotesque policy of destroying food while thousands starved. A media firestorm the prestigious hotel could not survive. More powerfully, he was surrounded. The hungry community, sensing the danger, had gathered at the entrance, their presence a silent, overwhelming shield. They weren't armed, but their sheer numbers and moral righteousness were enough to deter physical force. The security guards with Donovan, local men themselves, shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the desperate faces in the crowd. Donovan made his pragmatic decision. He issued a cold, non-negotiable ultimatum. Lowell was officially fired from the hotel, and his face was forbidden on the property. Furthermore, the soup kitchen had to remain entirely unseen and unacknowledged. If I hear so much as a whisper of this in the newspapers, I will personally see you arrested. Donovan spat, turning his back on the crowd and leaving the basement to the chef and the grateful poor. The crisis had passed, leaving behind a profound sense of victory and survival. Lowell continued his work, now solely dedicated to the wooden spoon. For nearly 2 more years, he and O'Malley perfected their secret system, defying the hotel and feeding countless families. The story of the chef who sacrificed his stardom for sustenance became a whispered legend, a true folk tale of resilience. The impact went beyond calories. It was psychological. Lowell proved that dignity was the most vital ingredient. He took the shame of the scrap and transformed it into the honor of the shared meal, solidifying the community's belief that they were worthy of the finest resources the city had to offer. Lowell never returned to the world of the silver fork. When the Depression finally began to recede, he used his remaining savings to open a small, honest workingman's diner, serving hearty, simple meals at prices anyone could afford. He lost the fame, the title, and the fortune, but he gained something far more enduring. He gained a legacy defined by profound moral courage. He proved that the true measure of a man's character is not what he charges for his talents, but where he chooses to dedicate them. The wooden spoon, once a symbol of necessity, became the emblem of his true, unbreakable success. Thomas Lowell's story is the definitive portrait of unbreakable America. He traded luxury for humanity, not because he was forced, but because he chose to. He stood at the moral crossroads of a crumbling nation and decided that true wealth wasn't measured in gold or caviar, but in the simple, quiet dignity of a well-fed stranger. His great sacrifice was not a loss, it was the ultimate reclamation of his own soul. If this story of unbreakable American spirit moved you, hit that subscribe button. We have 1,000 more just like it.